Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. Our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We bring you weekly topics and thought-provoking guests to get you to stop, reflect, and think about what it means to be a leader in a modern world. Our aim is to help you become the leader you wish you always had, as we learn together and lead together. Please enjoy the show. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm very honoured today to be joined by Brett Larson. Brett works for W.L. Gore and Associates, the organisation that's responsible for the invention and the distribution of the material Goretex in all of its forms around the world. And I'm sure most of you at home have probably come across that wonderful material at some point. Brett's got a really interesting background. He really started at the manufacturing floor level as a manufacturing lead before moving into other positions in the organisation, including being the manager of factories, being a plant leader, and ultimately moving into business operations. And his current role with the organisation is in leadership development in that manufacturing business. He's also the head of an organisation called Synaptic Leadership Development, and we're going to explore quite a bit today about where he's going with that and what that means. He's also the author of an upcoming book called Leaders with a capital L. And this book is going to explore servant leadership and how that can lead to high-performance team. I'm really excited to see where our conversation goes today and to pick from Brett's experiences about what it means to develop these high-performance teams. So, Brett, please introduce yourself to our audience, give a little bit more about your background, and tell us what led you to be with us today.
Thanks, Mick. I sure appreciate being here and having this opportunity. So out of college, I graduated as an industrial engineer, but pretty early on, I realized that was not my passion, that I wanted to lead and work with people. And so since about 1989 to about 2019, I was a leader in some form or another at various levels. You already described that. I was also a black belt in the Six Sigma program. So I got a good background in problem solving and project management. And one of the things I realized as I led teams is the thing that fed me is helping people grow and develop and seeing them be successful. And so in 2017, I started to pursue that a little bit more, and I became certified as a professional coach. And then we had an opportunity at Gore open up in 2019 for a more dedicated leadership development program manager serving our manufacturing community. And so I started to actually take a PhD program on organizational leadership. And after a few classes, I realized that that was a little bit too time consuming, but I was privileged to have access to a ton of great research on leaders and on leadership development programs. And so that investigation, that research kind of led me to come up with what I think is a fairly unique approach to leadership development that isn't traditional. And we've been applying that approach within Gore Medical Products Division manufacturing now for 2.5 years, 3 years. And so what's unique about that approach is essentially, instead of, a traditional approach is where you have a cohort program and you pull leaders in from throughout the organization and you deliver content. And then they take that content back to their work environment and they try to apply it. And then they go back to class and the cycle repeats itself. And typically, leadership development programs, a lot of them also utilize competency models, and they look at one that I'm familiar with has 18 different competencies to assess leaders by. And what I found in the research is competency models really don't work that well. They don't show business results. But what is critically important, what is correlated with high performance leaders, is emotional intelligence. And we didn't have kind of a dedicated emotional intelligence class or program. And so that is kind of the cornerstone of our approach to leadership development, as well as we don't just pull leaders in, but we talk about the value in the program, and we wait for leaders to say, hey, we want to develop our team of leaders. Can you come and work with us? And so it's a pull. Leaders are very busy people. And I think that pull is really important because they're motivated to learn, they're motivated to apply, and it allows me and my team to serve their need, to go to them to see what are their unique challenges. And in addition to emotional intelligence training, what else can we provide that addresses their specific needs? So those are some things that we're doing that's unique, that'll be in the book. Really, what's interesting, Mick, and I'm sure you'll realize this, is it's wonderful to talk about what makes a good leader and to help grow leaders, because when you talk about those things, you have to embody those. You can't just have your words mean something and your behavior means something else. So when I talk about servant leaders, I need to be a service provider to leaders to be able to be in integrity with the model that I'm speaking to. So that's what we try and do with our leadership development program.
So, Brett, at the Leadership Project, our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo and to rethink what it means to be a leader. So I love that you've stopped and you've paused and you've reflected on what is working and what's not working. And I'm really interested to unpack a little bit more shortly about some of those things that you discovered about what was working and what you decided to do differently to address what was not working. But what I'm interested to start with is, was there a particular moment in time during your career where you stopped and thought, well, maybe leadership needs to change?
Well, I think that so leadership in general, the role of leadership, I don't know that I looked at it that broadly until I've been in this role. Obviously, I've had some leaders that have been excellent, and I've had some leaders that haven't. And so from a specific standpoint, I've done a lot of assessing and trying to provide feedback. I think I'm one of those employees that probably is hard on a leader because I've developed a comfort. I've done really scary things, and I'm still here to talk about it. So I've developed the comfort with being somewhat courageous. And so one of my beliefs is that you can't complain about something. You can't be frustrated about something unless you try to do something about it. And so I've tried to give feedback, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I will say that in this role and looking through research and then comparing it to what I see as a leadership development program, I do scratch my head a little bit about the whole field of leadership development and why it seems to be still fairly traditional. And I need to humble myself a little bit here. I am not the world's authority on leadership development programs. But, things things like emotional intelligence is a great example. Mick, you have it in your mission as well. I'm surprised. A lot of research shows how important emotional intelligence is for leaders. I'm surprised that leadership development programs don't have emotional intelligence as a foundational standard. So that would be one example. I'm not sure I answered your question, but
no, that's okay. It helps us with an exploration of where we'll go with our conversation, Brett. And one of the things that I'm really admiring there, so you're humble, and we're going to talk about humble shortly, the word humble as well. You're humble enough to say, okay, you're not an expert, but you're also seeing that you wanted to do something different. You wanted to question, why are we doing these traditional approaches and what's missing here? And there's lots of different threads I want to unpack, and I think let's do them kind of one at a time. You mentioned before about cohort-based approaches, but very specifically, the idea that you might have, 20 different departments across your organization, or you might have people from different organizations, and you're going to pick one person out of a team, send them off on a program, and expect them to come back transformed. Tell me more about what you think was working about that and what wasn't working.
Excellent. So some of the benefits of that are you develop relationships across the organization. So you can then run something a challenge you're facing with another leader who's in a different part of the organization and not have to worry so much about confidentiality and exposing people. So you do develop a network of peers with programs like that. Another benefit is it's standard material. So everyone sees the same material. And there's benefits to that. And additionally, it's probably more efficient than my approach because you've got a standard class and you just pull people in, you deliver content, you go to the next class. Whereas the approach that I'm using and that we're using, it's not just me too. I have a team that we run ideas past each other and so on. But our approach is much more getting embedded in that with that leader and with their team that they're leading. So what we want to do is, again, it's a pull. We sit with the leader. We take measurements on the current environment through various standard surveys. And then we sit down and we review those measurements and we identify opportunities. And so every area will be different, but we kind of partner with that leader and then we pull their team in. And a lot of the leaders, all of the leaders I'm working with will have 2 or 3 levels of leaders that they are responsible for, that they lead. And so it's built in, there's a team of about from the entry level leader to the leader that I'm partnering with. There's a team of anywhere from 8 to 20 leaders. And so we could go through emotional intelligence training together and they can, learn about themselves and learn about each other and develop some capability in disagreeing and pushing back and challenging and in creating a really high quality culture within their leadership team because they're going through this together.
Okay, very, very interesting. I want to come back and talk about some of the mechanics of it in a moment. Just want to share with you some of the things that I heard. So in those cohort-based programs, there are some advantages of it, and part of it is the diversity of thought, hearing from other people, from other backgrounds, from other experiences. I like what you said about the confidentiality. They get into a removed environment. But then that's also the negative as well, isn't it? Because in that environment where it's removed from the context of the day-to-day operations, it's no longer contextual. And it's very difficult for one person. Let's say they go on a conference. It doesn't have to be a training program. It's very difficult for one person in your company to go on a conference learn something magical and come back and change the world. That's very difficult.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that was an additional point that I think is a challenge, because leaders are busy people. And to take what they've learned and bring it back into their environment, especially if their environment is with a lot of other leaders, and then try to apply it. They both have to teach everyone. Everyone has to clear their schedule, learn the concept, and then apply it, having learned it secondhand. So the application, I think, is a little bit challenging in that kind of a setup as well.
One of the things I heard John C. Maxwell talk about recently, and I think it picks on some learnings from Glass's pyramid here, that a lot of learning is experiential as well. So you learn by experiencing something, remembering that experience, remembering the emotions that came with that experience. So the person that goes off to an amazing transformational conference where they've had some kind of movement within themselves, and then they go back to the organization and they try to regale everything that they learnt at that conference, it falls flat because the people that they're talking to didn't experience what that person experienced. They didn't feel the emotions that that person felt. Whereas if you did it all together, you feel that experience and you feel that emotion together. So I think that's some of the unpicking the science of what you're getting at here, Brett. I think it's really interesting.
Yes. And just to touch on that point, if I might, it's a great point, because, we talk about, I forget what the source is, but one source says 70% of learning is experiential, 20 is partnering and learning from another, and 10 is classroom. So if 70% is experiential, how does the leadership development community hope to make a lot of progress in developing leaders when a lot of what they're doing is teaching concept in a classroom environment? So one key piece of how we engage with leaders in development is we also implement a process that's a succession planning process that I'm sure many companies have something similar. But this process, I think, is really important, because essentially it's leaders sitting down at least every quarter and identifying those people that are candidates for leadership or for the next role of leadership. And this team discusses each candidate against a very broad set of guidelines, and they assess where they need to grow and develop. And then they together identify experiential opportunities that one of them could go back and have a conversation with the developee and say, hey, know you're interested in leadership development. I think that, or the team has discussed this, and we think that one of your limitations might be on your ability to have difficult conversations. How does that feel to you? And they have a conversation. And when there's disagreement, that's awesome. They can find the truth in there and come up with a new plan. But when there's agreement, then they are able to identify the experiences that would help that person develop that skill. And so it's a process where multiple leaders, not just one leader, we all have bias. And one way to kind of limit our bias is to have multiple people input. So it's multiple people assessing somebody and what their growth opportunities are. It's conversations with that person on how they can improve and grow and develop and what experiences are available. And then it's the team of leaders also being calibrated on, hey, we talked about Mick. Mick had this opportunity. And so anybody then can see, oh gosh, I just saw him have an interaction. I want to talk to him about that because I think, that's what we were talking about. I think it could have been better. So, it's a concept of it takes a village to raise the child. And so if you have a group of leaders supporting development of future leaders, that's a pretty powerful call for things. So.
Yeah, I really like what I'm hearing, Brett, around this kind of coaching. It's kind of collaborative coaching almost, and a learning mindset based on collaborative learning. So it's collaborative coaching, collaborative learning with a learning mindset. It's really interesting. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that you might be ahead of the game here. And I'll explain that a little bit further. Very recent announcement by Professor Peter Hawkins and David Clutterbuck, creating something called the World Team Coaching Institute. And they're taking a series of executive coaches, life coaches, leadership coaches that have all been coaching people in a one-on-one environment and pivoting it to the point where you're coaching an entire team, not just the leader.
Fantastic. I will. Are you going to put them in your link?
I will.
Because I would love to look them up. Thank you.
It's very much in its infancy, but everything I've read about it so far, they're onto something, and you're onto something, Brett. You're really onto something here. Okay, let's explore a little bit further. In that environment where you do have lots of different team members, how do you cultivate the right psychologically safe environment and the right culture to make it successful and value-adding?
That is a really complex question, but it's a great one. One of the things that's wonderful about Gore is that we are very clear on our values. We in a quite detailed way, define what's important to us and what a Gore associate, what's expected out of a Gore associate. So that definition of our values creates kind of that foundation to build the house on. And it aligns very well with wanting engagement, wanting challenge, wanting, one of our values is the power of small teams, as a matter of fact. So having identified that those values as a background is a great place to then talk to people about, so how do we now create psychological safety? And in fact, I think emotional intelligence is just so important because we first have to be aware of ourselves and be able to manage ourselves so that we don't just fly off the handle, have an emotional reaction, and not even recognize that we had that. But, okay, I had an emotional reaction. What was that about? What would I do differently? And that self-management is the second component of emotional intelligence. So the ability to be aware of yourself and how you are impacting others, and then be aware of others' emotions and their reaction to you, and so on. Those skills enable you then to create, I think, an environment that's psychologically safe. So we go through emotional intelligence, and then we brainstorm on how do you create an environment with psychological safety, and everyone kind of participates in that. And so that becomes kind of a blueprint for individual teams. Some of the things that I recommend, though, is upfront with your team, you ought to set the expectation. Hey, we want challenge. We want independent thought. We want you to be a business owner and to not be afraid to speak your mind. So you can state that up front. In fact, I give a presentation called the Power of Constructive Conflict, where I say, if I'm a leader and I share a plan with you as my team, if you all agree, what have I learned? I'm not sure I've learned anything except maybe there's agreement, but maybe not. If one member of the team disagrees with me, what have I learned? Well, I learned that they're thinking critically. I learned I can probably trust them because they're going to speak their mind. we've all learned together their perspective, which is different. It also has engaged everyone now in thinking more deeply about the issue, and we get to a better solution. And it's all because somebody had the guts to challenge. And so that's one thing. You set that expectation. 2, you talk about the value of challenge. Then 3, when somebody disagrees with me in the meeting and I'm on my game, I love to say, Mick, thank you so much for challenging me on that. Everyone, please notice. Really appreciate the independent thought and the challenge that Mick had, because this is not easy. But I hope that everyone feels comfortable enough to challenge each other as we get to a better place. Now let's talk about what Mick suggested. So I want to also make us much more aware, emotionally aware of our team dynamics, because there's individual emotional intelligence and there's team emotional intelligence, and we try to grow both. So did that answer your question on how to kind of
so completely
psychological safety?
Yeah,
okay.
So completely. And I want to summarize it a little bit for the audience, the things that I took away from that. And I'd like you to reflect and tell me whether I've summarized it well, Brett. So the first thing is everything was rooted in values. Having those values from the outset as the foundation of your house is really important. The next part, and you didn't quite say this, but I think it's important to add, is living by those values and that your actions match what your values say. And this time, I'm going to borrow from another person in the John C. Maxwell family, which is Mark Cole. One of his favourite sayings I've heard him say is, your organisation's got a plaque problem. There's a plaque on the wall that says what the values are, but you're not living those values. So you need to live those values. If you have those values, if you live those values, you're then starting to establish trust. And trust can then be the building block upon which what Brett is talking about. On the emotional intelligence front, it does start with that self-awareness, understanding what your own emotional triggers are, and then being able to self-manage. I want to be careful with this one, because what you want to be able to do with your emotions is to control them for a virtuous outcome. That means that sometimes you want to completely control that emotion. Other times you actually may want it to bubble to the surface, but very purposefully, not a erratic emotion. You don't want the situation where people are whispering around going, hey, is the boss in a good mood today? That's the worst thing. That means that you're not in control of those emotions. Then what Brett is then saying, if the leader has enough self-awareness to understand their emotional triggers and enough self-management to control those emotions, he's then establishing essentially a blame-free culture where people can speak their mind openly because they know that the leader is going to listen. They're going to pay attention, and they're going to pay attention without judgment. Now you're starting to build that psychological safety. And what I loved in the example that Brett showed is the way he reflected it back to the whole group. It was like a fuel. It was an encouragement. The example that he gave in his story was, oh, thank you so much, Mick. Team, this is what we want. We want to challenge each other. We want to be able to have these conversations. And then you're building a virtuous cycle, because now everyone feels that they've got a voice. They feel that their opinions matter. They feel like they matter. And you can start building that environment of psychological safety. How was that summary?
Thank you, Mick. That's beautiful. And I would like to add a couple of things. One is you talked about judgment, and that's a really key piece in all this. When you judge, you kind of create space, you create a distance between you and others. I like to think of it as data. It's all just data. and let's figure out what to do with it. It's not good or bad. It just is. So that's one piece. Another, and plus this applies to ourselves too. We're the worst enemies of ourselves. No one could be as rude to ourselves as sometimes our inner critic is, And so stop judging yourself. At the end of the day, I'll think about the day and I'll go, oh God, why did I do that? And then I'll catch myself judging and I'll go, stop. What did I do? What's the learning? What would I do differently? Let it go. So that is a key word. The second thing is, I want to just make a point because you do this so amazingly well. You are a terrific listener. Listening, who goes to listening school? Who goes to listening class? Why don't they teach leaders how to listen? Because it is such a powerful way to tell people that they matter. And you do a terrific job of it. And I would encourage any leader out there or anybody to improve your listening skills. And the third thing is I wanted to share an example, an experience that is pretty profound on what the value is when somebody disagrees or somebody points out and challenges. I was in a team meeting with my team. There was probably 8 of us ish, and in the course of the meeting, we were discussing how to solve a problem, and various people had various ideas, and I was kind of a little bit spacing out, a little bit daydreaming, and then somebody said a solution, and I said, oh boy, I think that's a terrific idea. And then one of the people that I lead said, oh, that's great, Brett. Hannah had that idea 5 minutes ago. What, you don't hear it if it's from a woman? And I looked over at Hannah and said, Hannah, is that true? And she smiled and nodded. And Murray pointing this out gave me the wonderful opportunity for everyone, not just me, but to be self-aware that I missed it, to apologize. I said, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, Hannah. Everyone, the next great ideas are Hannah's ideas, let's overcompensate. And also in that moment, I was able to say, thank you so much, Murray, for pointing that out. I had no idea I was doing it. And I know that men, the generalization is that we don't hear women. We don't listen to women enough. And so you're pointing this out helps us all be sensitive to that. So it was just a beautiful opportunity because Murray challenged me.
Thank you so much for that amazing illustration. That was perfect. Yeah. And can I say to you that it's also an example that you've created a psychologically safe environment. Otherwise, Murray wouldn't have felt safe to tell you, right? So there's a positive there as well. And it can happen, by the way. We're all human beings. There are times where you can lose focus in a meeting. And I love that you're able to just apologize and move on from there. What I most like about what you've just shared, it's a beautiful segue. Everyone in our audience to think about this for a moment. Everything that Brett is describing is one of the keys to unlocking diversity and inclusion in your business. By having these environments where everyone feels like they can speak their mind and speak up, you're encouraging diversity of thought. So you need to surround yourself with a group of people from diverse backgrounds, whatever that might mean to you, race, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, trade qualification versus someone that's in finance, etc. Like surround yourself with people with diverse backgrounds and diverse experiences. Give them the environment where they feel comfortable and safe that they can express their opinions and their experiences in a way where they feel valued and they feel listened to and they feel like they matter. That then creates inclusion because no one feels excluded. Everyone feels like they have that opportunity to speak their mind and they feel like they're part of something bigger. So just a beautiful, beautiful example, Brett. What are your reflections on what I'm saying about D&I there? So the diversity and inclusion element of that. Is that your experience?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think psychological safety is a kind of another way to state inclusion. If people feel safe, they're going to share their perspective. So yes, I think that is, it's you don't create inclusion by talking about it, or diversity or equity either. You do it by behavior. And one thing too I'd like to share is that this, I know, Mick, one of your visions is to work with leaders that is their first experience as a leader. And that's a challenging place because you're probably a new leader because you are a great individual performer. You get things done. You solve problems. You've got a great skill set. And now when you're a leader, you can't do it all yourself. That's not your job anymore. You have to back up and make room for others. And that can be intimidating a little bit. I've lost control or whatever. But I will say to you that the few teams that I've led where we've finally gotten to a great place where we can challenge each other freely, that is the most satisfying, rewarding environment ever. It's not scary to be challenged. It's not scary for somebody to disagree with me. It's a wonderful thing because now you're all just feeding off each other. And what I've found is I also get a lot less fires coming to my door. We got a problem with this because I'm not making all the decisions. We're all doing it. So we have a lot of resources around the table. And if they came to me, it's just because other people weren't available and it's something they hadn't seen before. So it makes life and it makes work so much more rewarding if you can achieve that.
And that's what we all want, Brett. We all want to work for an organization where our work is understood, where we're rewarded for what we do, where it's a rewarding experience because we feel like we're making a positive impact and a contribution. Just wonderful. Okay, I'd like to segue into some of the programs now that you've developed and unpick those a little bit more. So I promised earlier that we would come back to the word humble. And I'm sure everyone in the audience is scratching their head going, why is humble such an important word? And humility is a very important aspect of any leader, by the way. But you've used the word humble in a different way. So please tell us about the Humble Development Program.
Thank you. That's just the moniker that I've placed on the 7-step process that we use to develop leaders. And humble stands for the HUM is human, the first 3 letters of human. The B is based, and the LE in humble is leadership. So it's human-based leadership or humble development, human-based leadership development. So that's the moniker. And one of the books that kind of changed my leadership life was the book Good to Great by Jim Collins. And what was really cool about that book is that they just looked at data and said, these are the highest performing companies over time. Now let's figure out why. And even though Jim didn't want to have the answer be leaders, when they investigated, that was probably the top reason is, hey, all these leaders had similar qualities. And the 2 qualities they had is a driven for success of the organization, not personal success, but success of the organization. And the second one was a level of humility that invited everyone else to participate and to play And that's why I think over time, these organizations were so effective, because the humble leader creates everyone else as a leader, so that when they're gone, other people pick up the slack because they've been, participating fully all along the way. So humble, I think, is a really powerful word and a powerful attribute for leaders.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's, and it speaks volumes because it means something, human-based leadership. And then at the same time, bringing in that element of humility immediately there. Let's explore that a little bit for a moment, because you do talk about in your framework about leaders having the ability to admit their mistake. There are some that would say that a leader admitting mistakes is a sign of weakness. What's your reflection on that?
If you think it's a sign of weakness, then your model for a leader is somebody that has all of the answers and that is above reproach and is perfect, or is disingenuous because when they're not perfect, they can't admit that they're not perfect. So there's challenges, I think, with the view that when leaders admit that they were wrong, somehow that weakens them. Because I think, so you look at the other part of it, I just know personally that when a leader has admitted that they screwed something up, now I can relate to that person because I screw up a lot, and you're just, now we have something in common. And thank you so much for taking responsibility. There's a big chunk in that too. And to not walk past the truth, but the truth becomes more important than your ego. And so there's an awful lot there. I can speak more to the benefits of it than I can maybe to a leader, maybe Patton or somebody like that, an award that they just got to get things done. Fine, you don't have time for that. Maybe you just got to be seen as decisive and powerful. But I think in the corporate world, not being able to admit that you screwed something up is much more of a long-term weakness.
And without doubt, by the way, I fully agree with you, and it was a provocative question on purpose. And even in the military, I would say if you can't admit your mistakes, you're not learning. And if you're not learning, you'll make the same mistakes over and over again. Definition of insanity is to do the same things over and over again and expect a different result. So you do need to have that humility to admit your mistakes, and it's actually a sign of strength. And it also builds trust. I like what you said about relatability too, Brett. It builds relatability and it builds trust. Mm-hmm. I don't know how we've gotten on this train here today, but we're on John C. Maxwell's train today for whatever reason.
I love John Maxwell.
Well, another one from him on this one about when challenged with a similar question about isn't admitting in this case it was shortcomings, but isn't admitting your shortcomings a sign of weakness? The simple answer was that assumes that they don't already know.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're not able to admit your mistakes or admit your shortcomings, first of all, it doesn't show humility. Secondly, it doesn't build trust. And there's a very good chance that the team already know what you're good at and what you're not good at. So why hide it? Right?
And plus, I would guess that you've had this experience, Nick, where if you have somebody that you lead that isn't able to admit their mistake, one, often it's hard to find the mistake. So it takes a huge investigation. And then when you find it and they can't admit that they made a mistake, one, you wonder if you can trust them. Two, you are concerned about their ability in the future and their ability to work as an effective teammate. So when you put the shoe on the other foot as a leader, I bet there's very few leaders that would have much patience with somebody that they lead that isn't able to take responsibility for a mistake.
Yeah, 1,000%, Brett. Another one that you have in your framework is about feedback. And interestingly, when you gave your example before, when you were talking about essentially the team gathering around and working on improvement, you brought up the example of someone not being very good at challenging conversation. Tell me more about your thoughts about feedback and why it's important.
Yeah. So I think if I had to choose a skill that a leader absolutely has to be expert in, it's in giving feedback. And by the way, in receiving feedback. So let's do the quick one first. Receiving feedback. As a leader, if somebody has the gumption, the courage to give you feedback, somebody that you lead, this is a gift. This is an amazing gift that you can throw in the garbage by being defensive or by explaining it away. And basically those things say, well, you're wrong. And that breaks down psychological safety as quickly as anything. So as a leader, we got to recognize that it takes courage to give somebody an authority feedback. And if somebody is giving you that, they have overcome their courage and their discomfort, and they care about you enough to give you this feedback. And so what I promote is your job is to receive the feedback, period. Ask open-ended questions. Ask, maybe what would they have done? Be very curious, really try and understand it, do reflective listening. Let me make sure I got straight what you're saying, but do not justify, do not deny, do not explain. Now, if there are things that they clearly didn't know, that is why they give you that feedback, but do that a day later, a week later, circle back and go to them and say, hey, I've been thinking about the feedback you gave me. And I was wondering, did you know of this other circumstance or whatever it is? So you're still able to impart knowledge that informs them of why you did what you did, but you don't do it in that moment. In that moment, you tell them, thank you, it's safe, and please keep helping me grow into a better leader. So that's the receiving feedback. The giving feedback, there is a common model out there that we've used in the past more than recently called, I forgot what the name of it is, but it's situation, behavior, impact. I'm going to state the situation, what the behavior was, and how it impacted me or others. And it's a very crisp formula that gives direct feedback without, judging you. It just talks about the impact on me. That might be really good for people that are very uncomfortable giving feedback. They need a formula, they need some clarity, or for a peer-to-peer. But as a leader, if I'm giving feedback to somebody, it's rare that it needs to be urgent. If they made a racial slur or something, absolutely. Hey, that's not acceptable. Let's go talk about this. And then it can be a one-way conversation. But I'm going to digress just a little bit. I went into this a new commitment as a leader with a new leadership team. And the leadership team was very responsible, very capable, very knowledgeable. They were a really good team of leaders. And then when I met with the operators, what I found was a lot of frustration, a lot of feeling disempowered, a lot of feeling like they were micromanaged. And I was trying to understand what was going on. So I met with the leaders and I said, hey, let's talk about the environment in there and how do you give feedback? And so we had this concept, or an engineer grabbed them and they walked in late because of that. As a leader, you're an authority and you just from 30,000 feet dropped a feedback bomb and then walked away. And what you what you just told them is, I don't really care what your side of the story is. I don't care your perspective. What about, hey, I noticed you were 5 minutes late. Is everything okay? And just the question, you can state the situation, the facts of the situation, but then following it up with a question allows them to provide their experience. It allows them to take responsibility. If they were late because they were out too late the night before, 95% of the time, they're going to say, I'm sorry, I screwed up. And then you can ask things like, well, how can you stop it from happening again or whatever, and then be done. But they were able to then own it without you dropping it on them. So I believe conversational feedback wherever possible is really important. In fact, it deepens relationships instead of makes them more shallow and divisive.
I love that term, conversational feedback. Really nice, Brett. And I like this concept of starting with the question. There's pretty much only two ways that can go that I can think of instantly. There may be more, but there's two ways that asking that question could go. You, as the leader, either get more situational awareness of what was really going on and you discover something deeper or more important, or the person takes ownership and owns it.
Or they could not take ownership too. They could say, yeah, but the traffic was horrible. And then you can then hit them with, well, the impact of this is on your team and on your build. So you can still get to the ownership thing. And my expectation is, but you don't start there.
Yeah, really nice, Brett. A couple of things I want to unpack and get your feedback on here. We all have blind spots, every single one of us. Some of the key words that Brett used here. Feedback is a gift. It's a gift to help you uncover those blind spots. The second thing that he said, that person, the words are still ringing in my head, Brett. It was so powerful. That person cared enough about you that they overcame their fear to have the courage to give you that feedback. They care enough about you that they overcome their fear to have the courage to give you that feedback. I said that twice on purpose. It's very powerful. So give them the respect of listening with an open mind, without judgment. And maybe ask more questions so that you do ensure that you fully understand what they're trying to tell you. And it may be because, remember, they're trying to overcome some fear here and they're building up courage. The first thing that they might tell you might only be the tip of something else. So by asking that exploratory question, they might say, you know what, boss, while we're at it, they might tell you something even more important. So listen without judgment. Don't defend yourself. Don't react. And maybe even ask some exploratory questions to see if there's anything more behind that tip that they've exposed. Now, here's my go. Admit your mistakes. Admit your shortcomings. This is something that I struggle with. I'm not good at giving constructive feedback to people. I'm very good at giving positive feedback. I'm not as good at giving constructive feedback. And it's something that I need to work on as a leader, because when I receive feedback, I love it. I fully subscribe to everything you said, Brett, that feedback is a gift. But for something within my brain, just being really open with the entire world that listens to this podcast, when it is my turn to give someone else some constructive feedback, I do struggle with it, right? It can be challenging. Yeah.
So you are a human. Congratulations. Yes. If somebody said they're totally comfortable giving somebody else feedback, I would probably call them a liar or ask them to start a religion or something. But one thing that I try to do, well, if I need to give somebody feedback, and this is again what we teach because we're as a team, we're addressing a team that works together. use each other. So it's a wonderful opportunity to deepen a relationship. It's a wonderful opportunity to ruin a relationship. So Mick, if I need to say to Joe, I need to give Joe some feedback, and I work with you, I might say, hey, Mick, can you be Joe? I'd like to practice giving Joe feedback on this scenario. And I want you to be a grumpy Joe, and then I want you to be a receptive Joe, because this conversation is really important. It needs to go well. That's one kind of resource. Two, I try and think about what are our shared objectives that unites us, that I can utilize, I can point to, and also talk about, Joe, I really care. I don't like the sandwich, the compliment, negative, and then compliment or whatever, but I do think it's important to say, to humanize it and get the full range. So I really care about your success. And I really, I don't know what was going on, but here's the facts of the situation. What is your perspective on it? What do you think are the positives of that? What do you think are the negatives? What could be a better way, or whatever? But talk through it with the ultimate goal being that Joe is a fantastic employee. That's why I'm giving him feedback. And I think that if people are smart, you can't fool anybody. They'll catch on. But if you go into that with the mindset, not that Joe is a slacker or Joe is flawed, but with the mindset of Joe has a lot to contribute and I want to help him be successful, then that'll come out when you give the feedback.
You used a similar word again and a similar phrasing, Brett. You care enough about Joe and Joe's success that you want to give him this feedback. So care is at the root of feedback. Really love this. All right, one more exploratory path I'd like to go down. You have mentioned quite earlier in the interview that you don't fully buy into competency-based approaches or 9-box assessments or other kind of instruments that people use to measure leadership attributes and the like. Tell me more about your thoughts there.
Well, detailed statistical research will say that we are not good assessors of each other. That data, if I assess you, the data from my assessment reflects more about me than it does about you. That the data is not reliable and it is not valid. So it kills me that research says this, and yet we're not paying attention to it. Now, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think it is important to have some way to assess, to consider somebody's attributes. But so there's this model of 18 that one part of our organization is using, 18 competencies. Where do you start with that? So I have to be skilled in 18 different areas, and you're going to find some areas that I'm not skilled at. And so if I then improve my skills on those 3 areas, does having 18 competencies make me a good leader? No, it might. In fact, it might make you more. Number one, it's developing a weakness, which there's a lot of data that says when you utilize strengths, it's much more, the business outcomes are much greater than fixing weaknesses. And what the heart of the question becomes, what makes a good leader? And I will give a plug to Buckingham and Goodall. One of my favorite books is 9 Lies About Work. Talk about somebody that challenges the status quo. He says he talks statistically first. We're not good assessors of others, but we are good assessors of our own experience. That data is reliable and valid. So how do we assess leadership? We should assess it by followership. If there are people that will follow you, if your team will follow you and you ask them questions about their own experience with you, and you determine that there's strong followership, you're a fantastic leader then. I don't care about the competencies. Leadership, by definition, is if you have followers. That creates the leader. And the founder of W.L. Gore and Associates was way before his time. He started our company in 1958, and he said, one of our core principles is leaders defined by followership. So that's where I would say, okay, we need to drive strong followership in our leaders. We need to measure strength of followership, and that should be the core assessment of their leadership. But we also need to, from a development standpoint, identify areas where they could grow and improve. I think 18 competencies is way too many. I would go for more like 5. Buckingham, I think, says 3 to 5, but I would go with 5 or 6. In our humble approach, we have 6. And there's 6 for Gore because they reflect Gore's values. In another company, you might have a different 6. They should be aligned with your values. But they're very broad. So 1 is technical competency. Okay. That could be 10 competencies buried underneath the headline technical. 1 is soft skills. Again, that's a huge group, but it's just a broad kind of way to go, okay, is there technical pieces that stop them from being effective that we need to support their growth in? Is there soft skill pieces? So these are broad categories. They're not traditional competency models, but they do enable a conversation for how can we help this leader grow their capability.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Really good, Brett, and you articulated it very well. And I love that the process that you just took us through to explain your thinking. One thing I'd like to say there is that for the avoidance of doubt, followers is not the amount of people that follow you on Instagram or Facebook. We're talking about the people that you inspire into action. If you can inspire them into action, that's wonderful. What I really did like what you said about Brett was the alignment to values, because that's going to speak volumes about the culture of the organization and making sure that the leaders are living those values. So I definitely see the value in that for sure. Using the word value far too often there, but definitely see the value of that.
Yeah.
That might be a good segue to ask you this question. Why your upcoming book, why is it called Leaders with a capital L?
Because leader is a common title now, but I don't think having that title makes you a leader. And to me, a capital L leader, we've already talked about some things like they admit mistakes. They speak last. They don't need to have the idea. They want their team to be engaged. They don't want to bias their team by speaking first. They're good at giving and receiving feedback. And probably one of the toughest things is they have courage to speak truth to power. And this is a tough one. And this is where I think you earn the capital L, because often there might be decisions that are made, quote unquote, above you, that is making your life more difficult or your team's life more difficult. And how in the world would the person that made that decision be able to make a good decision if they don't have the full picture? And so leaders need to have the courage to go to people of authority, even if it's your CEO, and say, you know what, this decision was made, or I know you're considering this, and I don't I think one of my roles is to make sure that we make the best possible decisions. And part of that for me is to make you aware of maybe things you might not be aware that factor into the decision, or whatever the approach is. I think a capital L leader also has that courage piece.
Yeah. Really nice, Brett. Really looking forward to reading it when it comes out. I love the fact that the word courage has come up. Wasn't counting, but it's come up at least a dozen times in our discussion today. So that tells us something as well. But what a wonderful discussion, Brett. I've really enjoyed it today. I personally learnt a lot. So thank you very much for everything that you've shared.
Can I make one additional point to make? I'm sorry. I think this is a really key piece. We diversity, equity, and inclusion has become a really important topic that companies are driving. We should have been driving it years ago, but now we're waking up to it. The challenge is how do you create more diversity? So you have a leadership team that is a bunch of white men. How do you create diversity? You fire a bunch of people and hire in a more diverse group? One of the things that the humble approach to leadership, the humble leadership development does is when you've identified those developees, I call them, and you've got a group of people that you're supporting their growth and development of. Now you can go, okay, how diverse is that group of developees? And we did this about 5 years ago in a team that I was leading. And we had, I think it was something like 19 developees that we've identified. We've either identified them as leaders or they've self-identified. And 3 of them were people of color. And our current leadership team was something like 18 and 2 with 2 people of color. So what we did is we said, okay, who else do we think on the manufacturing floor has the capacity, the capability to be a really good leader that don't look like us? And so we went out proactively and tapped people on the shoulder and said, hey, Gerald, have you ever considered leadership? And as a matter of fact, we have a big Native American community here in Flagstaff, Arizona, and a huge portion of our manufacturing population are Native Americans. And a lot of that community, part of their culture is humility. And so they don't think of themselves naturally as leaders. And so the tapping on the shoulder, probably the first time that they even considered that question. So at that time, we identified 6 people that were willing to say, yeah, I'd be interested in it. And so we started putting time and effort into supporting their development. It only took 2 years, Mick, and 4 of those 6 became, 4 of the 6 became leaders, and 2 of them now are the next level of leader. And so this is a really tangible way to drive diversity in your leadership is by driving diversity in your developees. Because now you got choices. You're not just choosing a bunch of who's the next white man we're going to have lead. You got a diverse group that are available.
Some really interesting things there, Brett, and I want to unpack it just a little bit before we draw to our conclusion. What I loved about your story is cultural awareness. So the fact that the Native American group did not see themselves as leaders, they did not feel like it was their position to stick up their hand and say, I would like to be a leader, but when invited to do so, they were interested. So there's a lot of cultural understanding that went into that. That cultural understanding could just be a perception too. In this case, it's a cultural understanding. In other cases, you might have a diverse workforce at the shop floor level, but when they look up and they see the executive, etc., they may not feel that their raising of the hand is welcome. So you need to provide that environment where it does feel welcome. And then we might be able to start getting a snowball effect, and we might be able to start I'm going to borrow some words from Dr. Alessandra Wall here, previous podcast guest. Then you can start, and listen carefully to the words, you can start to retain and attract a diverse workforce. And I'll give you the context of why that came up, Brett. I asked Alessandra the question about how do we attract and retain, and she immediately reversed it and said, you will never attract and retain until you retain and attract. And how you're going to retain is by giving people opportunities and to show them that they belong, creating that inclusive environment where they see that there's a place for them. There's a place for them at the executive, in the senior leadership, giving them the understanding that what they do matters and that we're creating a positive impact, that the work that they do is valued, and staying true to your values and beliefs. D&I is, once we're coming back to plaque problems again, aren't we? D&I is not something that you put on your mission statement or on your corporate goals and say, job done. No, it takes the positive action that Brett is talking about. Then you're going to start retaining talent. And when you retain talent, that's going to attract new talent.
And it'll attract new diverse leaders, because now I see a leader that looks like me. Maybe I could do that too. So that's beautiful.
Spot on. Okay, that brings us to our quickfire round, Brett. So last 4 questions. And you've already shared a couple of books along the way. You can share one of those again, or you can pick a new one. What is your favorite book?
Well, I'll pick a new one. So I have 3, 9 Lies About Work, good to great. But I also like just these simple life lessons that's in the 4 agreements. The 4 agreements are you familiar with that, Meg? Again, this is like the Toltec culture, ancient culture, I think is in Central America. The 4 agreements are being impeccable with your word. Words matter. And so even when you're like in a back room being sloppy with your words, that says something about you. So impeccable with your words. Don't make assumptions. If you're starting to make assumptions, ask questions. Seek understanding. Don't take anything personally. This is kind of a theme that we've talked about too, where taking things personally is a barrier to growth and learning. And what this book says is what other people say about you is much more about them than it is about you. And then always do your best. So those are 4 pretty sound principles to live by. So.
I love it. I'm going to have to check that one out. That one's new to me, but everything you said resonated so strongly. What's your favorite quote?
So I'll throw one really quickly out there. Wisdom is the realization of the vastness of your ignorance. I love that. That helps keep me humble. But the most profound one that I like is Oliver Wendell Holmes, I think, said, for the simplicity on this side of complexity, I wouldn't give you a fig. But for the simplicity on the other side of complexity, for that, I would give you anything I have. And I can just share what it means to me is that it's very easy to do right and wrong and think dualistically, good, bad, right, wrong, black, white. The world is much more complex than that. And so as you work through the complexity and try and look at a right, wrong issue, and you think about it more deeply, on the other side, you get to other simple things like it's about love, it's about understanding, it's about being kind, it's about caring and those things. And that's the simplicity that you need to get through the complexity to really appreciate how simple life can actually be. So I love that quote.
I'm not sure if you notice or not, so I'm going to make you aware. You just did that. You just took something very complex, a very complex statement, and made it simple for us. I love it. Yeah, you embodied the quote as you described it to us. It was wonderful. Yeah, really good, Brett. Now, what's one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
I wish I knew the destructiveness of judgment. An early relationship I had said, "Gosh, you and your family sure judge people." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? We're just talking about situations." And that was my first inkling, but I really didn't pay that much heed to it. And now the further I've gone, I've realized that judgment just stands in the way of progress, that no one deserves judgment. You can talk about behaviors, you can talk about negative and positive consequences of behaviors, but judging people, and moreover, judging yourself, is just not the way to live, and is just a barrier to your own personal growth.
Wow. You know, I've actually lost count how many episodes we're into this podcast, and that's my favorite answer to that question. We've asked that question to every guest. Wow. Really nice, Brett. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
And finally, I'm sure that there's going to be lots of people in our audience that are eager to hear when Leaders with a capital L is going to be released, maybe eager to learn more about your framework and all of the things that you're doing to really flip this thing to more about team coaching and team development more than just one-on-one development. How do people get in contact with you, Brett?
My website is synapticleader.com. So that's the best way. Also, it's still in the process, and maybe by the time this podcast airs, I will have a YouTube channel. I'm on LinkedIn, Brett Larson, in Flagstaff, Arizona. You can find me there. And I really love anybody to reach out and have. This is the most fun I've had in a long time, Nick. Thank you. I just love this whole topic and this conversation. So yeah, those are a couple of ways. And just a little story. As you probably know, it's really a lot of the names have been taken, business names, especially around leadership. And I was listening to Joe Dispenza. I'm not sure if you've heard that name, but he talks about the ability for anybody of any age. Your brain is neuroplastic, and you can change. You can develop new synapses. You can develop new beliefs and new habits. We all have that capability. And so I thought, gosh, what I want is leaders to be aware and to be able to learn and grow and change. Synaptic Leader seems like a good name to me.
Yeah, nice one.
So,
I love the way you got there with that. And I've got to echo back to you. This has been a wonderful interview. So great having you on the show. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I personally learnt a lot from it, and I know that our audience will as well. So thank you so much, Brett. And we wish you the best of luck with the upcoming book launch, and we'll be championing and cheering in your corner for your message to get out to as many people as possible.
And I'll be cheering for you as well. Thank you so much for the honor of participating in your podcast, Meg.
Great. All right. Thank you, Brett. Stay safe. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Project podcast at mickspears.com. I'm your host, Mick Spears. Sound design and editing by Faris Sadek. Social media by Gerald Calabo. And special thanks to our operations manager, Say Spears. We appreciate you, and we appreciate your time today. You can catch the video podcast and our series of shorter videos by subscribing to the Leadership Project YouTube channel. And you can join the conversation at our Facebook community group. We look forward to bringing you another great interview next week as we learn together and lead together. In the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.